In this episode, I will cover the substitute and we're gonna explore the journey to the Cliffside cave, the contents of the cave, and we're gonna analyze the numbers and explore their meaning. Let's start with the character journeys. This episode starts on day 7. During the night, I believe that Man in Black Locke has traveled with the outrigger all over to Hydra Island to conduct some business regarding the Ajira survivors. And then he will travel to the main island. There is also a possibility that he sensed that Jin was hurt or on the brink of death. You know, he has a tendency of getting close to people that are in between places. So I like the idea that Man in Black Locke went to see Claire while she was carrying Jin. She might have gotten startled as she has not seen this man appearing as John Locke before, but he introduced himself as her friend. And as she spent time with the Man in Black before, she understands that this is not John Locke, but her trusting friend. Claire doesn't know the difference between her father's appearances and her friend, as she tells us in the next episode.
How can I be so sure? Okay, well, first my father told me, and then my friend told me, so I'm pretty damn sure.
Your friend? Who is your friend?
My friend.
John?
That's not John. This is my friend.
So in her 3-year time alone, Man in Black might have appeared as someone else and tricked her into thinking he's her friend. He might have helped Claire a little bit during the night in carrying Jin. He probably sensed that Jin could not be claimed the same way as Saeed, but keeping Jin with Claire is a good idea. By now it's going to be morning and he will transform into the smoke monster again. Based on the movements we see him go through the jungle, then this valley, and then later on he's arriving in the barracks, turning around this corner at the LaFleur house where Sawyer is, before going back into the jungle. And I believe they are over here. He picks up his machete, and this is a fun thing. Remember, this machete originally came from the 1950s others. They were trying to chop off Juliet's arm. It was later taken by time travelers, and Jin was trying to use it to cut down the rope, down to the well. In the episode This Place is Death. Then he lodged it into the tree, but by the time they time travel again, the machete was no longer there. So between the time the well was built and 1974, someone found this machete in the tree and took it. This could have been the Man in Black sometime before the Dharma Initiative came to the island. It's in his possession now. The Man in Black, as Locke, sets Richard free, but then he sees a vision of young Jacob. Alarmed, he moves on to the barracks. I guess he transforms the smoke monster a little bit to gain some speed, until he transforms back to John Locke and walks into Sawyer's house.
What if I told you I was the person who could answer the most important question in the world?
He convinces him to come with him under the pretense of learning why he was brought to the island. I think they move in this direction, so at the same time, Jack and Hurley are moving in another direction on the other side of the mountain chain. They are going to the lighthouse, while this duo is over here. Young Jacob appears again as he chases it. Leaving Sawyer alone, Richard Alpert emerges from the jungle, urging Sawyer to follow him to the temple. Sawyer refuses, and Richard leaves. Richard is now on his way to the temple. At the same time, we've got another group carrying Locke's body. They've trekked down the main golf course valley, which has much easier terrain than the normal jungle. They've been walking through the night and day and enter the beach camp in the normal direction from here to here. Ilana knows that the Man in Black can't change shapes anymore. It's either Smokey or Locke. They bury John Locke.
Excuse me?
Books. You read books?
Sure, who doesn't?
My favorite Steinbeck. Mice and Men. You know that one?
Nope. A little after my time.
Man in Black Locke and Sawyer's journey take them to the Cliffside cave, near the volcanic crater. An absolutely awesome location. It's filmed at Spitting Cave, situated near the China Walls coastline south on Oahu, the lava rock area we saw in the season 1 finale. In terms of our island, it's all part of the same area. Just like the lava rock area we've seen so many times in the show, it's all amazing rock formations coming from the volcano of the island, the crater as you see behind them here. And if you ever visit Hawaii, make sure to make a trip here. It's breathtaking and highly dangerous. The fact that they carried all the equipment to this rock is impressive.
And that's not even the heaviest part yet.
Tough part is so hot. Down there at the bottom it's about 120 degrees. against the rocks. It's really hot. It takes your concentration, everything away.
Not afraid of heights. Especially when I get all this stuff will keep me safe.
Anchor, buckle, connection. ABC. Check your safety like 60 times a day, and that holds me off for like 5 or 6 minutes. Then you check again.
The characters go down and enter the cave. Even though Man in Black says that Jacob wrote down all the names, we have to ask ourselves the question, whose cave is it? In terms of symbolism, it works so much better if this is regarded as Man in Black's cave. Sawyer has to travel with the antagonistic force of the island, facing perils on his way into a dark and gloomy place, mimicking the underworld setting we've faced in the last season. While Jack and Hurley, both future protectors of the island, are guided by the protagonistic force of the island, Jacob. And instead of going down, they go up in the skies. Both scenes convey the same message, to tell the characters about the candidates and how Jacob picked them all. Jacob does refer to this cave when talking about the candidates later in the season, and this was also brought up on the podcast.
Does the cave belong to the Man in Black and the lighthouse belong to Jacob? Are both looking for separate replacements to fill in for them? Love always, Rachel from Austin. Now, I think this is a good question because we have many questions on this issue about the numbers, about Kate's, significance in the lighthouse. And
which is surprising because we thought nobody would have any questions about the numbers. I mean,
Exactly.
First off, the illumination that I can provide is that the show speaks for itself. So, for anything that we're about to say is purely theoretical. When Locke brings Sawyer, or fake Locke, or the Man in Black, whatever you want to call him, we call him Locke. When Locke brings Sawyer down into that cave, is he telling the truth? He basically says, this is Jacob's cave. Here's my interpretation. When he walks in and he sees that rock on that scale, and he says it's an inside joke, and he throws it, it doesn't seem to be pretending to me. So that would seem to be strong evidence that, in fact, Jacob wrote all these names here. However, there's also this lighthouse where the names seem to correspond with angles or degrees on this rotating mirror. So is it possible that we know that in the lighthouse, Jacob seemed to be watching these people, his candidates, but he was also recording their names down in a cave? Why would he do it both places? Is it possible, Carlton, that maybe he wanted his nemesis to find the cave, and that there's a little bit of misdirection going on here? That maybe he crossed off Kate's name in the cave to throw the monster off his scent? Is it possible, Carlton? Just allow the possibility.
I'm going to say that theory could live. That theory could live. I think that is a possibility.
We can discuss whether or not Jacob wanted his brother to find this cave and might have abandoned it and kept using the lighthouse instead. I'm very open to both ideas. There's a table here with some objects, such as an ankh. The scale obviously refers to the balance between Jacob and his brother, and throwing the wise stone is obviously meant to be that Jacob is dead and the scale tips the other way. I really like the loot behind here. Apparently it's one from the Renaissance era, so if that's the case, it's been here for centuries. As we know, there are certain sound frequencies that repel the monster. This is something that Dharma learned and built the sonic fence around their barracks. Dharma also referred to the monster as Cerberus, named after the three-headed dog in Greek mythology, who guarded the underworld. Orpheus managed to get past this beast by playing music. Was there a musician on the island 500 years ago who wasn't killed by the monster because he played on his lute? I love the idea that history repeats itself, and just like Charlie, who was a musician, used his knowledge in the Looking Glass station, or that the Looking Glass was programmed by a musician probably decades before Charlie went there, that there's always going to be a musician on the island who did something heroic but ultimately perished. The lute was kept here in the cave for hundreds of years. Man in Black Locke offers for Sawyer to join him in a mission to leave the island, and Sawyer accepts.
Hell yes.
The magic of the numbers. I absolutely loved that the show further explored the numbers in this episode. The previous explanation we got was that the answer on why Dharma was obsessed with them, that they were the core numerical values of the core environmental and human factors of the Valenzetti equation.
Both nations decided to find a solution. The result was the Valenzetti equation, commissioned under the highest secrecy through the UN Security Council. The equation is the brainchild of the Italian mathematician Enzo Valenzetti. It predicts the exact number of years and months before humanity extinguishes itself, whether through nuclear fire, chemical and biological warfare, conventional warfare, pandemic, overpopulation. His results are chilling, and attention must be paid. Valenzetti gave numerical values to the core environmental and human factors in his equation. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, and 42.
This explanation didn't come in the show, it came in the alternate reality game The Lost Experience, but the name Valenzetti was teased in the show on the blast door map. One of the writers behind The Lost Experience was Javi Grillo-Marxuach, who was part of the Lost writing team since early 2004 and was developing the mythology with the other writers, such as in their meeting on February 24th, 2004. In the time before the production of the Lost pilot, as well as after the Lost pilot was finished, they had discussed some ideas on where the show would go and the early fruition of the Dharma Initiative, which they had given the name the Medusa Corporation. Marxuach talked about this in 2015 and said this:
"The reason the Medusa Corporation was performing these experiments was that they had stumbled on an equation much like the famed Drake equation, popularized by Carl Sagan in Cosmos and used to estimate the number of discoverable worlds holding life in the universe, which predicted the end of the world. By performing experiments in a place they knew as a crucible for extremes of human behavior, some of those experiments involving behavioral modification on polar bears. Medusa hoped to change humanity and avoid an impending Armageddon."
With everything we learned about the Dharma Initiative later on, it fits that they became a group fixated on the numbers, like a cult fixated on symbols or numbers. Their deep interest in these numbers can be compared to theologians studying 666, the number of the beast, a subject that has been parodied, used in movies.
Dated the 6th of June, 5 years ago. The day your son was born. 6th month, 6th day.
Studied extensively for many years. I know that some people were dissatisfied with the answer in The Lost Experience. It answers why Dharma was obsessed with them, using them as a serial code, like some sort of Easter egg. It kind of became their signature, but it's still a bit simplistic in the overall picture of Lost. In Season 6, we learn about them being assigned to the candidates, and them being degrees to where you adjust the lighthouse wheel. But hold on, the Valenzetti equation was discovered in the 1960s, years before our precious candidates were born, and used extensively by the Dharma Initiative in the 70s. Hurley, candidate number 8, wasn't even born until the 80s, so what came first? Could it be that when rotating to these 6 different degrees, the mirror was a little bit clearer, giving the impression that these degrees were important, that the person you're witnessing is a little bit more special, years before they were born? After all, the numbers that are assigned our special candidates are a little bit more bolded than the rest, even though many of them were not crossed off yet. Did Jacob realize that there was something more about these 6 numbers, hundreds of years before several of these characters were born? Did it always show their childhood home? For instance, did he watch Christian Shepherd before Jack, or David Reyes before Hugo was born? Can we also look at a situation where Jacob visited the mathematician Enzo Valenzetti, sparked him with the idea of this equation? Although the numbers weren't exactly a way of telling how the world would end, but how the numbers could save the world. Tying an unanswerable mystery to characters was the best option in the end. The team effort of adding the numbers to the computer, often done by several of the candidates to prevent the world from ending, is part of this answer. It's a great foreshadowing of the candidates being the key to saving the island in the end. And of course you have the fail-safe Desmond, who is also part of this equation. But with the Valenzetti equation being present before them, suggests something more. There was an interview with Damon Lindelof conducted by Jeff Jensen where Lindelof said that the numbers were around long before the early 60s. There will be more on the numbers, yes, but explaining why and how they are magic is like trying to explain why some magic kids are born to 2 muggles. The Valenzetti equation uses those numbers, but trust me, they were around long before the early 60s. But for fans waiting for an advanced dissertation on the mythic significance of the numbers, I direct them to Qui-Gon Jinn's speech to Shmi Skywalker regarding midichlorians and posed the following question: happy now? The combination of all of these suggests that the answer has a much more thematic and richer value, perhaps for how all the characters are connected. Sean and Carlton Hughes said in 2007 that the show in some sense is about how we are all intertwined in our lives, and that's represented through the numbers. We have to apply a more abstract answer to the numbers for its massive use and importance throughout the show. It's not like Jacob was following them and tampering with Hurley's car, or why there's so many instances of the numbers just popping up. The showrunners have said that there won't be an answer to that, since that would be the equivalent of the midichlorian explanation in Star Wars, and Star Wars was fine with the more spiritual aspect of the Force.
The Force? The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
And more explanation around the hows and whys is just not interesting. And it's not like people were mad at the end of Star Wars that they weren't given a bigger explanation on the Force. We can't dissect the numbers as a murder mystery, but maybe study them through a semiotic analysis, the study of the activity that involves science, including the production of meaning. How words and images come to have meanings, how things we see and hear stand in for ideas. Film and TV are mediums that communicate denotatively and connotatively. A denotative sign is the most basic and literal one. A rose is a flower. A connotative sign is one with a meaning. A rose means passion and love, the former being what the audience sees, what is presented. Connotation is when an emotional association is given to what is presented. It can have a cultural meaning. It also involves what we as an audience bring. On paper, the numbers is just a string of numbers. On Lost, especially of the episode numbers, it's much more. This brings me to the term metonymy, a kind of connotation where one sign is substituted for another with which it is closely associated. For instance, the Eiffel Tower is a metonym for Paris. During its completion, it was a wrought iron tower made for the World's Fair. Now, it's a sign representing a city and even a country. In film, it's used as a metonym, almost like a device to make sure that everyone knows this scene takes place in Paris. It's not a likely scenario if you go to Google Street View and pluck a man into a random street in Paris. You won't see the Eiffel Tower. This is something you see in film and television. Sometimes these things changes. A film with a swastika made in the silent era would not have the same connotations for the audience at the time. It's an ancient and innocent symbol in Eastern Asia, used by their culture for many years. A shot with a swastika now would be interpreted as Nazism. There are certain codes and conventions that are specific to film to enhance a meaning for a sign, to give it its connotation. For instance, a zoom could be seen as a filmic punctuation, and Lost uses a lot of codes to enhance a meaning to the numbers and their connection to the island. Any appearance of the numbers before this episode aired, which wasn't the full sequence but just bits and pieces, did not cause a reaction to the audience, and it wouldn't produce a meaning if you didn't have this episode and this backstory. This episode creates a meaning to them. It uses the numbers and invites 3 different people to the island, confirming a connection between them and the island, becoming a metonym for the island's reach. The first character is Hurley. The episode starts with a mystery around him and this number sequence. Later we learn where they came from, a radio broadcast from the island, and Danielle explains this to Hurley. Numbers makes a connection with 3 people. Hurley and Danielle are the 2. Who is the third? That's the interesting thing. It's the spectator. The episode has a very unconventional ending, in a shot that doesn't look like it belongs in Lost when it takes us to the hatch. The episode's culmination is Hurley's and Danielle's heart-to-heart talk. The mission has completed, the batteries are delivered, the heroes have returned, and Hurley finally tells someone about his backstory. It's a great ending with a little bit of humor. Then the camera does something weird.
Dude, I bare my soul, and all I get is bloody jokes.
It goes into the jungle and shows us, and only us, that the numbers are etched onto the hatch. The hatch hasn't been mentioned in this episode. We've actually not seen it for a while. There are no other characters here. And the previous scene didn't even suggest that the story would continue here. The spectator is one with the screen, and the island is moving us closer, letting us onto a little secret. Now we have a connotation with numbers. We don't have the words of an unreliable Frenchwoman, but actual proof that they are directly tied to the island. This scene is so unique. You don't get scenes like this in Lost, and the closest thing to this is the opening of The Other 48 Days, but that one continues into Ana Lucia's experiences in the water. This scene doesn't continue into the next episode, it just ends. The ending of Numbers exists solely for the spectator until the Lost title card comes up, highlighting the numbers originating from this mysterious island. It's what the French film theorist Christian Metz, who specialized in the study of semiotics, would call a primary cinematic identification. Everything else on film is secondary cinematic identification. When we identify with Hurley and empathize with him on his journey, or even seeing the numbers on the paper through his point of view, is still secondary. With the primary cinematic identification, he likens it to a mirror and says that with this cinematic system, the spectator identifies with himself as a pure act of perception. That this act, being the only eyes of the camera, it's much more fascinating to behold on film. He calls it the all-perceiving subject, who's not tethered to a body, but moves freely in this film. To take an example from Hitchcock, the sequences where the camera moves freely is much more interesting to Metz than the scenes with the protagonist, or stuff like Russian Ark, where it feels like we are a ghost in this film, which is all in one take. This brilliant ending kind of reminds me of Citizen Kane, and if you haven't seen it, skip to this part. The film opens up to Charles Foster Kane's final words, Rosebud, and the movie utilizes a lot of flashbacks to tell the story of this publishing tycoon, with a newsreel producer trying to learn more about this man, as well as the meaning of his final words, Rosebud.
Rosebud. Then he dropped the glass ball and it broke on the floor. He didn't say anything after that, and I knew he was dead. He said all kinds of things that didn't mean anything.
Sentimental fellow, aren't you?
Yes and no.
Well, that isn't worth $1,000.
You can keep on asking questions if you want.
We're leaving tonight.
As soon as we're through taking pictures, allow yourself plenty of time.
And the film's ending is the revelation. Then the camera does the job. It's the eyes of the spectator again, and gives us, the viewers, the revelation when we see the word plus what it is written on, the sled he had when he was young, which together creates a powerful metonym. When Kane died and said the word Rosebud, it wasn't just him wondering where he put that goddamn sled. It was him longing back to his youth and an innocent life before he became a rich old businessman. That's what Rosebud is. It's much more than just his sled, revealed only to the spectator. And we realize that at the twist at the end of the movie. Using metonymy engages the audience. I remember the huge spark in the fans' activity after this episode aired.
And people come out with 15,000 different ways to equate the numbers to what's happening in the real world, to what's happening to something else, and it all makes sense for them, and everybody has an opinion.
Hurley's numbers and the word Dharma are six numbers and 6 letters, and in the Bible, on the 6th day, God created humans.
Everyone was going back to find the numbers hidden in season 1, tying it with equations and Bible verses and much more. That cliffhanger ending with a primary cinematic identification was a way to encourage us to actively search for meaning and connect the dots, and the audience weren't the only ones fixated on them. Was the man in black trying to figure them out himself? Did he influence the French team into trying to crack the code? After all, the French team, when they found the radio tower, they didn't change the radio broadcast to a distress signal. That's weird.
After we shipwrecked, my team continued to search for the transmission source. It was weeks before we found the radio tower.
There's a radio tower on this island?
Yes, up by the Black Rock. Some of us continued to search for the meaning of those numbers while we waited for rescue. But then the sickness came. When my team was gone, I went back up to the tower and changed the transmission.
They were interested in exploring the numbers, just like us, and just like the Dharma Initiative was when they were working with the Valenzetti equation. It wasn't until Danielle had killed them all she went back and changed the transmission. Their deep fixation is just like Jim Carrey's fixation on the number 23 in the film by the same name. I think the answer to the numbers is simple. The numbers is a metonym for the reach of the island. The vast amount of numbers in the flashbacks is a subtle way of telling us that the island is everywhere.
I got some bad news for you, amigo. You can't kill yourself. The island won't let you.
What'd you say?
No matter how bad you want to, no matter how many different ways you try, it won't happen.
That this is the character's destiny. This is a beautiful part of film and television, and that you're able to do something that is much more than a literal presentation of what it is. The hows and whys. Plenty of film and TV shows try to do it as well. For instance, the animated film Song of the Sea uses a spiral all over the movie. A spiral to convey a deeper meaning. The film hides them, sometimes subtle and sometimes very apparent, where the character has to go on a fantastical journey rooted in ancient folk tales. Another film, like The Neon Demon, uses triangles. The Matrix has their falling green code to articulate the simulated reality, which is also subtly hinted at through the rain in this scene. The TV show Heroes had the helix appearing everywhere, where it was a real symbol for half of the catalyst, but on a more abstract level, it could be interpreted that people with superpowers are everywhere. Or in The Sixth Sense, that every time that the color red appears, a ghost is nearby. It's not like there's a Jacob-like person who goes around in the city following the main character and changes colors to stuff. But this is a thematic choice, because you're allowed to do choices like that in film and television, and Lost does the same thing. In a way, this abstract explanation about how all these characters are connected to the island, as well as the spectator to Lost, is a way to explain the magic and power of the appearances of numbers. If the show was condensed into a painting, then the numbers would have been the signature, the language of the island, which exists physically onto the painting, but it speaks to the characters and primarily to the spectator. Another great scene is Hurley's flashback in Exodus. It's like the entire world is making sure he's not getting to the island, with several coincidences that happen, like the power outage or car breaking down, while at the same time the island is literally screaming for him to get to the island. That's his destiny. That whole trip feels like a fantastical voyage, like when Alice is falling through Wonderland and important things pass by, where the island's presence is just bombarding the world we exist in. One of my favorite parts is the shot of the football team. They're not facing Hurley, they're facing us, the spectator, once again using this metonym to tell us about fate that is currently bringing the candidates to the island, but also us, the show Lost.
I don't think we did the right thing, Jack. I think it wants us to come back, Hurley. It's gonna do everything it can. We're never going back!
The numbers are about to become more and more meta, and in 2 years' time, it'll be integrated into the ABC Studios logo. So they're always going to be outside the fiction of Lost, but always connected to the show. It's all about the reach of the island, something that Damon Lindelof mentions in the season 4 bonus features.
So the reach of the island is sort of like, it goes way beyond the island. It can extend, sort of like Plastic Man, when he wants like a glass of water or whatever, he'll just be hanging out on his couch and he'll just go, wah, 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 and his hand is like extending, it's going up the stairs and it's looking in the bathroom. That's not where the cup of water is. It goes wah, 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 into his bedroom. Is like, oh, there's a coffee cup. It's not water, but I'll take that, and then he just brings it back. So there it is, and you wonder how he did it. The island is the same way, except the coffee cup is Jack.
Next episode is a bonus episode. It'll be a complete rundown of every single candidate, seen in the cave and lighthouse dial. And who knows, with some careful observation, there might be some people that were on the list after all. Give the video a thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed yet, it's never too late to do so. See you in a week.